us on the fifth connection. Theo is on a break, but we will be moving right along as we are looking at the unfolding story across 13 chapters of the book of Hebrews. Stick to itiveness is what it's about. The writer writes to Hebrews, that's Jewish Christians, Christian Hebrews, that they no longer remain Hebrews, but that they cling to, that they hold on to faith in Christ. So that the writer explains why Christ is greater than all. Not just everyone, not just everything, greater than all. And in the first 4 verses of chapter 1, stick to itiveness is based upon the superordinate one, this Son, that the writer is going to explain in terms of his identity. The writer is going to track his profile. So he does it line by line. And in this slice of the story, in chapter 2, verse 1 to 4, which we are going to look at today, the writer goes on to show how that Jesus, as the superordinate Son, is greater than angels. And that discussion starts in verse number 5 of chapter 1. Jesus is greater than the angels. The angels are messenger boys, if I could call it that, because the word angelos is a functional term. It tells us what these divine beings, what these spirit beings are all about. They are at God's beck and call because they are created beings. Jesus in chapter 1 verse 5, going all the way to chapter 10 verse 18, is the superordinate way. He's the superordinate way. What makes him the superordinate way? In his work, he does a super work. In his worth, he has a super worth. He's the superordinate one. He's the superordinate way. And in chapter 11, 12, and 13, he's the superordinate walk. He's not a subby. He's the superordinate one in every possible way. And so stick-to-itiveness is not just based upon whether we can perform well. It's not based on that. It's based on something very interesting, which you are going to find out as we walk through these chapters. What is the singular thing that requires stick-to-itiveness? How do I stick with the program? How do I stick in my faith to what Jesus has done? How do I stick to him? Well, immediately that raises a whole host of questions. Ain't I stuck to him? Well, if you get stuck, not to him, but get stuck in your walk with God, you run great risks. And so in these 4 verses, we are going to look at why it is important not to drift. Now, if you're a fisherman or a sailor and you are into fishing, then you know that setting a boat drift is very important. You need to know something about wind speeds. You need to know something about the currents. You need to know something about where the fish are. And what the writer does is he says, listen, to his audience at least, he says, drifters, beware. That's my title for this slice of the story. Drifters, beware. Because 2 ideas, 2 key thoughts rise in the biblical text. Because the superordinate Son is the one who has secured the throne, the begotten throne, because this is not about a Game of Thrones. He is secured, that throne, by an eligible heir whose merits and whose mediation marks him, sets him apart as the rightful king. That's verse 5 of chapter 1, all the through to 10:18. And these 4 verses of the story are no exception. Because the greater the reveal, the greater the responsibility not to drift. The greater the reveal, the greater the responsibility not to drift. Because of who Jesus is, this is a great reveal, greater than the law, greater than Moses, greater than angels. We looked at verse 5 to verse 14 of chapter 1, and we saw that this son is no angel king. He's untouched by angels. And so the question in these 4 verses is, what dividends accrue to drifters? What dividends accrue to drifters? If you drift and you're in danger of falling away, there's a great price you will pay. There's a big payout. And so in verse number 1, the greater the reveal, the greater our responsibility, and the greater the risk. Chapter 2 is going to talk about reprisals when this risk is exceeded. But here in verse number 1, that's verse number 2 to verse number 4. But here in verse number 1, the greater the reveal, the greater our responsibility, and the greater the risk. Verse 1 says, therefore, based upon what I've talked to you about as Christian Hebrews, we must pay closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. Why must we pay close attention? Well, paying attention is the bill that you will never stop paying until the day you and I drop. We'll have to pay attention to what is crucial and important in life and living. The writer says, listen up, pay much closer attention to what you have heard. Because you see, to pay attention, to attend to something is important. Attention changes the world. That's Ian McGilchrist's words. Attention changes the world. Why is it that when we attend to something, it changes our world? Well, because when you pay attention, when you give focused attention to something, your hierarchy of values shift. Your hierarchy of values will shift immediately because there's something important that has surfaced in your saliency landscape. Think of the wonderful technology we have these days. We can take a photograph and we can pan in to one person's face so that all other faces pale into oblivion except that face. That's panning in. Or think of an emergency call that comes up on your phone. There's an SOS message that appears on your screen from a family member. You immediately focus on getting to that. Your saliency landscape has just shifted because something important has come onto the horizon. And your hierarchy of values will be rearranged in terms of what is now important. And that's how the brain works. The right hemisphere functions as a stage, while the left hemisphere functions as a spotlight on that stage. The right hemisphere catches the landscape, the terrain in one shot, as the stage in a theater does. Highlights the theater, the stage. And then the left hemisphere focuses in because the message has come through. There's attentive focus given. The spotlight has been turned on. And there is focus on the stage. So we need both of our hemispheres, left and right. The right is given to the big picture, and the left focuses in. The left zooms in, if you will, and latches on and swerves in that direction because it needs to attend to what it's now focusing on. It's like an island in the midst of an ocean. That island is hooked to the bed, the surface bed of the ocean. And so the island locks into the whole of the ocean, but all you see is the ocean with the island above the surface of the water level. And so these believers are called on to pay attention, give attention to what you have heard. What have you heard? It's going to explain that in 2 to 4. Why? Lest we drift away from it. Lest you, Christian Hebrews, drift away from it. The danger of drifting is that you will lose your way and you will be cut off from the life-giving sustenance of that to which you are linked to and hooked onto. So there's the warning, there's the risk, there's the danger. The danger is cutting adrift. And for these Christian Hebrews, the danger of drifting was extremely high because they were facing great persecution. Persecution was upsetting their world, upsetting their comfort zones. Their frog factors have been terminally affected. So they can't be the frog in the kettle, just heating up, the body heating up as the heat in the kettle rises. The danger for them is that they would revert back to Judaism. And the writer says, pay much closer attention to what you have heard. Why? Well, here's the second idea in verse 2 to verse number 4. The idea has to do with the fact that the greater the reveal, the greater our responsibility, and the greater the reprisals. Not only is there greater risk in verse 1, but in 2 to 4, in this slice of the story, the repercussions are damning. They are exceedingly great. Verse 2. For since the message, the one you heard in verse 1, that message was declared by angels. Remember, the writer is showing how that Jesus is better than the angels, superior to them, because of the message that he proclaims. He is the message. He doesn't just proclaim one. This message declared by angels proved to be reliable. And every transgression or disobedience received a just retribution. The message which was given by angels in the Old Testament was the law, given by Moses, mediated by the presence of angels. Because every transgression and disobedience would now be accounted for, and retribution would be meted out. This word for retribution or just retribution in the Greek text is one of the longest words in Greek in the New Testament. It's got 20 letters. But you, the writer says, Jewish believers, Christian Hebrews, you will get what's coming if you don't pay attention. Verse 3. How shall we escape, he says to the Christian Hebrews, if we neglect such a great salvation? Now, some would say this is leveled at unbelievers, those who don't really have the genuine thing, the real thing. They are professors, not possessors. Well, throughout the book, there's no distinction made like that. It's something that you have to bring on and bring in from outside of the biblical text. How will you, Christian Hebrews, escape if you neglect such a great salvation? Well, you must understand that the danger of drifting is part of 5 different warnings that is given in the book. Chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 5, chapter 10, and there's one that I'm missing because there are 5 and not 4. Chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 5, chapter 10, and chapter 12. That's where these warnings appear. And each of the warnings comes with a greater intensity of consequence. It's more intense than the previous warning that was given, more intense than the previous warning that has been given. And there are 5 of them. But these warnings are located within the context of great encouragement and exhortation. And we're going to look at these as we track through the story. Verse 3 says, this message was declared at first by the Lord, and it was attested to us by those who heard, while God also bore witness by signs and wonders and various miracles, and by gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. So while the message given by angels was great, the message declared now in relation to these Hebrew believers, these Christian Hebrews, is a message which has been attested to by the Lord, by miracles, by wonders, and by the gifts of the Spirit, because a new age has been ushered in. There's a new and living way, John 14, verse 6, and it's embodied in none other than this superordinate Son. He is the true and living way. You can track that idea 9 times throughout the book of Acts. Christianity, the word only appears once in the book of Acts, and then again in the letters that Peter writes. But Christianity is described as the way. You want to get this way of living right? Well, I'll get onto the one who is the way. Embrace him and allow him to embody his message in you and through you. So that's the beauty of what he's talking about in the 4 verses. He's talking to Christian Hebrews. Remember, Hebrews, these Hebrew believers, Hebrews would be a noun, Christian would be an adjective. An adjective modifies a noun, right? And this is what defines us, our being Christ's and belonging to Christ. So 2 things I want to leave with you. The first is that God desires that we live in fidelity to the flow of reality. That's the first thing. Live at the rock face of life and be able to process what comes at you no matter what, because of who you are, but more importantly, whose you are, because of whose I am. Live in fidelity to the flow of reality and embrace Jesus as the superordinate walk because of his work and his worth. He is the one that we cling to. He's the one that we attend to. God didn't save us, firstly, to serve him. He saved us to know him. John chapter 17, verse 1, 2, and 3. We are saved to know God, and out of knowing God, service is the thing that flows. So he didn't bring us this far to leave us. He didn't teach us to swim, to let us drown. He didn't build his home in us to move away. That's the song we want to play out with by the Imperials, entitled, He Didn't Bring Us This Far. So I trust that you have a good day as you attend to the word in your life. Goodbye. and God bless you.